Looking at my note, I wanted to start saying Dear Consul Generals, but they haven't arrived so far. But I can skip this and continue with the second part. Dear representatives of the diplomatic corps, there are at least two here, as far as I know. Maybe there are even more. Dear colleagues from far and close, and ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the opening of our international conference on Canada and the European Union / Germany in the global trading regime. This conference actually is part of an ongoing research project of the Institute for European Studies. We applied, like we have to do it at universities for those kind of conferences and research grants, actually 3 years back at a time when at least I was not really aware how far developed have been the preliminary talks between representatives of the EU on the one side and the Canadian government on the other side to restart talks that may lead to kind of negotiations about a more liberalized economic partnership between those two entities. So when I started coming up with this idea and had a first meeting, I really remember, back in Berlin with the former Canadian ambassador, he was on the website. I was surprised to say. I sent him, like probably he's getting all those kind of emails all the time. He was replying instantaneously saying, yeah, please, we can talk about that. I went there, and then I learned only that the Canadian side, the Canadian embassy in Berlin, as well as the German government, was at the time very much engaged in pushing forward on the side of the European Union, as well as on the Canadian side, to bring those two parties again together to talk about ways to come up with agreements that may lead the pathway to a kind of formal agreement in a very broad sense that hasn't existed, and it's not existing so far. Since then, as you may know, things have been developing, and only recently in March, there were the first results of the so-called scoping exercises, where the two parties were exploring a bit more in depth what could be the kind of agreements and parts of agreements we will come up with at the end of the day. So at this moment today, we don't know exactly whether there will at all, in the formal sense, be negotiations between Canada and the EU about a kind of economic partnership. But at least we may learn later on in our round table, because there are experts here who know more than I know. Reading newspapers, I'm not really sure how things will develop, but maybe there's a kind of optimism is justified that things will move. Now, this is the one story. The other one is obviously, there are testing times for any kind of project that has one dimension, more liberalization in cross-border economic transactions. We are living in stormy times, as we all know. Good evening. There's space here. That's at least the one representative I just want to mention from Consul General of Germany. So I just skipped those ones because there are more supposed to come. Welcome to you. Now let me continue with my text. You may have heard that this year, it's the first year actually since 1982 that world trade will actually shrink in absolute numbers. The negative growth rate of 9% is being suggested by the WTO. And you can imagine that this is really a kind of challenge for national governments. And we are at the same time, despite all those meetings, G20 and all those other meetings, we are confronted with the rise of new forms of protectionism. So that's a bit of the background of for this kind of Canada-EU trade negotiation, that it's happening in very difficult times. Now, we will have the opportunity to discuss a lot of the factual problems and barriers, opportunities of those talks, and eventually of this agreement that will be the outcome of all those talks. But the conference tomorrow also will deal with a couple of problems that are maybe beyond the current kind of political attempts to come up with an agreement, only thinking about, for the Canadian case, for example, we will talk about environmental regulation and those implications for cross-border trade, particularly looking at the tar sands in Alberta and what this will mean for the export sectors, the mineral export sectors of Alberta, but also BC. There are a lot of implications on all this, so there will be a lot of interesting topics tomorrow. This evening, we will start out with a keynote and followed immediately by a round table. But before I introduce our keynote speaker of the evening, I would like to ask my colleague Tim Cheek, Associate Principal of the College for Interdisciplinary Studies, to welcome you and to say some words. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Kurt. Good evening. My name is Timothy Cheek. I'm the Associate Principal of the College for Interdisciplinary Studies, which you will find just past our most interesting toilets in the hallway. We are the faculty-like object in which the Institute of European Studies operates. And we are a new version of an old thing at the University of British Columbia. So for those of you familiar with UBC and think CFIS, what is that? It's what FOGS, or Faculty of Graduate Studies, used to do with interdisciplinary research units. But I want to welcome you to this lovely venue at the C.K. Choi Building, and I express my gratitude to Herr Huebner for bringing such a distinguished collection of scholars and diplomatic personnel from around the world to come and work at this workshop. CFIS is interdisciplinary, it is international in focus, and it is engaged in orientation with the research, or applied in the research that we do. And it is very widespread, from fisheries to urban planning to environmental questions to the twin institutes here in this building of European Studies and the Institute for Asian Research, which is where I hang my hat when I'm not being a bureaucrat. I work on modern China. Interdisciplinary, international, and engaged. This is the reason we are particularly delighted both with the Institute of European Studies and this workshop. It is exactly what CFIS wants to do, and we are very pleased and grateful for the work of the Institute and Dr. Huebner for doing this. So I welcome you. I wish you the best in your work this weekend. And now I look forward to joining you in hearing Dr. Wilcox's talk.
Thanks so much, Tim. So, it is a great pleasure now to come to our main act of the evening, one of two actually, introducing Stephen Wilcox from the London School of Economics. Thank you very much for coming to UBC and to the Institute and to the conference. Steve is the program director for the Masters of International Political Economy at LSE. He is a trade policy expert in academic terms, also doing a lot of consultancy work and dealing with governments and European Union bureaucrats, administrations. So he is really the person best suited to deal with the topic of today, the European Union, external economic policy, trade, and other cases. Steve, it's a pleasure listening to you, and welcome.
Thanks very much.